a as it was just our house. I had been working in India with if anyone's familiar with Mother Teresa, I was working with her sisters there, volunteering at the House of the Dying and a children's home. First heard about attachment. And then when I came back to Canada, I was looking into kind of how can I serve the poorest of the poor, like Mother Teresa did, but in my context. I ended up getting a random babysitting job, trying to, as I was starting to figure out where my next job was going to be, as I had to quit my job in order to go several months to the other side of the world. And it was I had to look at attachment very differently when I was working in the children's home because I was only there for 3 or 4 months and then I'd get up and leave. So you actually didn't want to get too attached to kids because it's hard when volunteers come in and out and go. It was more helpful if I did laundry and those types of things. Well, so the sisters and the Indian women that were working there could actually spend more time in working on bonding with the children because they were more likely to actually be there for that child's life. So and originally it was going to be a foster parent, but then just the way that things end up like unfolding, I worked with a small girl who ended up being diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. Never heard of that, didn't have a clue what that was. Ended up finding this place up in the States called Camp Attach, where this young lady named Karen, who's the founder of the Radish Ranch, was running the intervention room, and she was trying to get stuff started up in Canada. So as the foster placement thing kind of didn't fall, like I just decided that it was more help if I was going to work on attachment. I was more beneficial working with families who actually had adoption because I love foster parents, some of the most amazing people I've met, but I've just worked with too many kids where we work on attachment and they get ripped out of the home, and you've done all that work that just completely undid itself when the system moves them or family decides to get whatever, but they've been there for 4 or 5 years. So and it can be very difficult to try to redo that work again with other people after it. So I kind of do that. I'm also a trauma-informed coach, got my training through Moving the Human Spirit. So it's just life coaching with a trauma-informed lens. I run a mentorship program for usually young Catholic women. We'll talk more about our faith and our relationship with the Lord. And then I work with Karen. Now in Canada, we're running therapeutic intensive, so week long. We're kind of trying to take what's good about Camp Attach, bring it to Canada, but make it more personalized for the family. So we work with one family at a time because trauma is one thing, but it manifests very differently in every single human being because we are so unique. So that's a bit about myself. I mean, I don't know if you want like this is where I grew up in Canada, and that's about it. So.
Which part of Canada you did you grow up in, or which part are you from?
I'm from Alberta. So I am in Vancouver Island now, but so that is where my baseline is. Our intensives we actually run in Manitoba because that is where Karen is, who is more of the expert than I am. So, but I am in Vancouver as of now, but I've spent most of my childhood up in Alberta.
So when you decided to do this work, what were some of your goals with this work?
Yeah, so the original goal of this work was when I was babysitting for that family, and this little girl, 2.5, cute as a button, came in. For the first, we have the honeymoon phase, um, where they're just, yeah, I mean, everyone's happy, it's good. Sometimes we'll call it kids one of the symptoms that we'll deal with, we'll say it's superficially charming. So so when they first come into a home, there's a bit of that. I'm not close to you yet. You're not that threat of love for me because they feel hurt when it comes to the attachment relationship for many, many different reasons. Um, so when I was working with her, it was fine. But then after a while, the mom was starting to say things like, she's really hard. I can't understand why this happens. But then when she was with me or the foster dad, she was perfect. And then the mom was at the point where she just said, I can't have her all the time anymore. Can you take her basically on the weekends or one day a week? And eventually I got to the point where I had her 40% of the time. They also had like awesome foster parents, some of the most amazing people I've met. They also had several other children. So it's not that I would do better than them. It was just like I was her most familiar like third primary caregiver, basically. And I didn't have 6 other children to try to give my love and attention to. So it was during COVID because I'd gotten back from India right before COVID had happened and then started doing uh, babysitting. But these kids, it was different than babysitting. And I've been nannying before, I'd worked with lots of different children, but children who don't trust authority and don't trust their parents and have this ex this need to self-protect and to be completely in charge all the time is just very different. So originally it started with these parents weren't sure if they were going to keep this little girl. They had talked to kind of the social worker, and the next placement was, oh, she'll get placed with me. It's one of those things where I fell in love, but I didn't fall in love with a where I got a boyfriend and got married. I fell in love with a child, and it became to the point that I felt like I was going to do anything. So she started play therapy. She did a few things that the social worker suggested, and it didn't work. Um, it felt like nothing we tried, we worked. So then by the time she was around the age 5, the foster mom had found this book about reactive attachment disorder. And we read it and we're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I contacted the lady who had started these camp attaches, and she had a few throughout the states. And I'm like, I don't like, there's no way this family's going to pick up their bags and go to camp. It's foster kids, so they can't like take them out of the country, that type of thing. The other thing is they're already burned out. They're done trying stuff, right? When you've tried things over and over and over again and they just fail, it's exhausting. So then I went there. I went to the camp. I tried to stay in the intervention room. I watched how we had our train, they let me volunteer as staff basically. So they trained us, and then a bunch of families came with kids struggling with similar attachment struggles, usually on the reactive attachment side, because it's like a spectrum, right? When you have attachment disorders. But um, and I came back and I just started implementing a few things. Some kids, sometimes you just need a few things and it can kind of help the kids turn on. Some kids need the full program. It just depends on the child and the dynamics of the home. So I just did a few things and I said, are you okay if I just like try this and this? And I was like, it's going to look really bad at first, not because what I'm doing was wrong. It's just because it's change, right? And she's going to fight it. Um, but can you just be patient with me for a little bit? And we'd been working together for 3 years at that point. So a pretty good relationship. Started implementing those things and saw like within 7 months, she was a very different kid. And she is still with her family where they were constantly thinking, we're going to have to send this kid back. This kid, we can't handle this child. Um, and as much as I would have loved to have her, ideally, the less we move them, the better, right? If we had to try to restart attachment with me as, hello, now I'm mom, even though foster mom was trying to be your mom. And in lots of cases with foster kids, the goal is reunification, but in this case, it just hasn't played out that way. Um, and I don't know. And then I just kept going back to camp attachment volunteering, and then I kept working with Karen. And Karen, who's getting her master's, she'll be a full-blown, who founded the Radish Ranch, she'll be a full-blown attachment therapist within, I don't know, a year or two here. But she has 14 years of experience working with some of the toughest kids. So training with her at camp and now running these parent intensives with her where I do the child care program and she does the parent training. It's just like, it was one of those things that I didn't seek it out. It just kind of happened. Right? And it's like, and now I seek it out quite intentionally, but it's because it fell there. And I just found a place of like, I felt purpose. I felt a need. Yeah, that would be kind of how it found me.
That's interesting because for me, I think some of the best passions that we discover are the ones that we're like, oh, I kind of like this. Then we pursue it a little bit more. Then we're like, oh, I love this. Right. And instead of it pursuing us, we're pursuing it. When you
Yes.
discover this love and you're like, give me more universe of this, right? Because I have this cup, I need a fill of it. I need this cup, I need this cup. Did you ever think you would love it the way that you did or that way that you do?
No, I don't think I ever thought. I think when I imagined myself as a kid working with because I'd always loved Mother Teresa, always loved the idea of helping the poor. I think I saw myself working more with people with like, say, severe physical disabilities, like nonverbal. They have to depend on you, not kids who lack a conscience and don't have remorse. Those are the type of kids I work with now, right? I didn't expect to be, and I expected this like, oh, soft love, and I still have to be empathetic and therapeutic in how I deliver things. But because my job is to direct the child towards the parent, I can come off as a little bit very neutral, right? I'm not super lovey-dovey, but I'm also can't be total drill sergeant. But it is like my job is for the child to have a place where mom and dad get a break, or I'll come in and help the parents learn how to do their thing. But I'm really boring. My job is to be boring. I keep the child safe in the structured program. Mom and dad get the break that they need. Um, and they can't attach to me. I like, don't get me wrong, I miss the when I had that little girl and had the capacity to do both because I had such a long relationship with her. But I was there for 3 years. I don't work with families usually that long, because the goal is to work myself out of a job. But so I didn't expect to love that so much. But I think why I love it so much is it's the end result. It's when I bring a child, like if, especially if I've had them for a couple days and they've had a break, and we have something called snuggle time where they reunite with mom or dad, and they, I don't know, the mom might feed it ice cream in its mouth and do something silly and is excited to see them. It makes it worth it, right? And I didn't think I would love that so much, even though it's like I'm not the fun parent or the one who gets to do the bonding things with them, because that's not what that child needs from me. That child needs to get connected to mom and dad first. So I, yeah, just didn't expect it.
When it comes to the children in these situations and the caregivers, whether they're adoptive or biological or maybe something else, what do you think are maybe some of the obstacles that caregivers are seeing when it comes to presenting the best possibilities for these children?
So I think some of the biggest obstacles that come in is A, sometimes people are just adoptive parents, foster parents. Well, adoptive parents are kind of just, once they've adopted, it feels like they're just left to their own devices and they're not given a lot of information. But there's also a lot of adoptions that turn out well, right? There's nothing that's like this particular trauma causes this particular attachment disorder, right? It's just like it's possible. It makes it more likely, but nothing's a guarantee. So so it feels like a lot of parents feel very blindsided by systems. So they don't know what to do. So they don't know how to, especially if they get the baby, because, or it's like we get told if they get adopted at birth, it's fine, but we don't recognize that that's still a loss for the baby. Um, yes, maybe they're less likely to have, say, something as severe as reactive attachment disorder, but it's still possible. So if we want to try to therapeutically do that first year of life when we have them, versus like maybe what we would do traditionally with a birth child that's well attached that didn't have trauma, though we're working with more and more birth families. And hopefully the stigma around that's not too hard, because I mean, there's so many different things that can break attachment, like things we can't control. Medical trauma can do it. Just that separation with the child. So the biggest obstacle is lack of being informed on the decision people are making, especially with foster kids. There's a lot of information of kids I worked with when I was doing foster care system where I wasn't told. And that was to my detriment and to the detriment of the child. Right. So it's felt like, because it's almost like they're afraid to tell you because then the kid's not going to have somewhere to go or something like that. Right. But it's so lack of knowledge. The other thing is lack of community support. So if the child really severely has more of just an attachment disorder and not so much a disability in the sense of like, um, yeah, like autism or something like that. That superficially charming piece, that symptom we talk about, where the child is perfect in public and then a total chaos at home, it very much isolates the parents. So lots of parents don't have communal support because their stories of what the child is like at home doesn't seem believable, because that child is so perfect out in public and behaves better out in public, and These children are really good at lying and lying really well and believable. And I'm like, Nietzsche will say, that this is part of the reason, like, who alone? We have reason to lie ourselves out of reality when we've suffered from it. So Nietzsche says that, right? And these children have been deeply hurt by reality. Their reality was not nice to them, so they don't even live in reality. So part of that mechanism or safety protection mechanism of lying is like, okay, I need to get myself out of this attachment relationship because attachment has only hurt me and I just want to move house to house to house to house. And then another thing is like, I just want to pretend like I'm not in the real world because my world in my head is not reality and I can escape from it, right? So I feel those are the biggest things. We have lack of support and lack of information.
And those are fantastic points. Like growing up the way I grew up without my mother and my father. So safety, attachment, I totally understand it. And when you said the reality in our mind, I remember I used to have like the most vivid of daydreams. I was a superhero in one of them. I was this great thing in another one, right? Until you wake up and you're like, oh crap, like life kind of sucks right now. But the beautiful thing about that experience is it pushed me to understand what was safe and unsafe at a very early age. When it comes to safety, what are some of the tools that we can maybe equip people with making their environment within the household safe?
Yes. So it would depend on how the severity of your child is, to how safe you want. So, Karen Purvis talks about felt safety. Now, that's not the Karen it's funny. They're two Karens. There's Karen, founder of the Radish Ranch, and then there's Karen Purvis. I cannot remember the name of her program, but if you looked up her name, she has a really good program working with kids, and she actually talks about felt safety. So that's a big thing for her. But she starts off with connection, which is good. And it is good generally for the like attachment disorder kids, attachment issue kids. When we start to get into the reactive attachment, especially more on the severe spectrum of the end, it we can't always start with connection. And this was something that Karen, the Karen who started the Radish Ranch, had a conversation with someone who was trained by Karen Purvis. Like, why doesn't it work for our more severe kids who seem to lack the empathy, lack the remorse? Because if you have a kid who has some conscience, it might be insecure attachment, but it's not no attachment, right? That's very different than a kid with, so the kids I work with generally have no attachment versus just insecure attachment. Um, so Karen, the Radish Ranch Karen, where we work with the more severe end of the spectrum, would say it's because we start with felt safety. So building felt safety on a practical level is tools. So we would have to look at the age of your child. The way that we do felt safety for our 2 to 5 year olds is different. And then there's the baby program. And the way that we do felt safety for our 6 to 12 year olds is different. And then 13 to up. And then sometimes we'll have a 6 year old who's like, Kate, actually, this child is developmentally acting more like a 3 year old. So we're going to put him in the 3 year old program for a little bit. Some of the things are like basic things like uh, we would recommend sometimes when families would come to our intensive based on what the child needs is if your kid is like sometimes they're like you have to make sure your kid's playing sports, you have to make sure your kid's going to school and having friends, and those are good things, but a lot of our kids can't handle that. They can't handle school, they can't handle friends, and they can't handle. So we talk about rewiring the brain to a place of safety. So the program has a basic program. We have to tweak it based on the unique needs of the child and the family. But the basic set safety, if the child was really severe, say we would recommend go home for like 6 months, maybe a year. That child, we make the world small, and you're making their world small because then they're not so overwhelmed by all the choices, the options, the friendship. It's like you're trying to redo that first year of life, or even inside the womb, especially with our kids who had maybe mom was really stressed when she was pregnant, so they felt all that stress and didn't attach to mom well. So say that's a birth child, that can affect it. Pregnancy, moms in war zones, whatever types of thing, even if it is your birth mom relationship, or a child who I didn't get to spend 9 months in my mom's tummy. I didn't get to spend that first year with my mom. So and so much brain development happens from, conception to that first 6 months of life is crazy in human development. So, and that's our foundation for the rest of our lives. Um, so on a practical level, we would talk first about small world. Now, every child, whatever their small world looks like, will be based on how much they can handle. We have kids who need a room where we just have a mattress and a blanket and a pillow, and that's where they because when they have a if they have a fit, they have a safe place to go where they're less likely to hurt themselves and to hurt other people. So it can be that extreme to a very, very simplified room. And the other thing is that rooms also over, it's not just the simplicity of having a place to go, it's also because kids who are extremely a traumatized brain are overstimulated by too much stuff. Like stuff is, or they get really attached to stuff because stuff is safe. Stuff hasn't hurt me. Versus like, so we kind of remove like a baby. If you're redoing the 9 months in utero in that first year, how much stuff does a baby need to thrive? Not really. It mostly just needs mom, primary caregiver. So that's why you'll see a lot of our kids who struggle with trauma either like are really attached to animals, really attached to stuff, um, because that hasn't hurt them in the past, right? And then they struggle having healthy relationships with other human beings. So that is a basic level. Now we'll have things like very structured, a structured life for consistency and rhythm that they can experience. Another thing for felt safety is that for particularly the population we deal with, that some people really struggle to understand is you're very much told if you have a child with anxiety, then you need to let them know what's going to happen, right? You need to say, okay, so yeah, we're going to go to Aunt Sherry's and we're going to go pick raspberries and then we have to stop at the store and blah, 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 blah. I have a nephew who has pretty high anxiety and very much needs to know what's going on. So his mom will tell him, but he trusts his mom. So he knows his mom is going to take care of it because she's the boss, she's in control, and it's going to be okay. Where a child who only trusts themselves and doesn't and believes the world is scary because that's how they internalize the world while they were developing with their experiences. Um, you tell them all these stuff and they just get overwhelmed because they don't know how they're going to handle it and their experiences escalate. So I've worked with so many parents who are constantly trying to because they're like, "Oh, my child has anxiety." And they're like, "So I'm giving them all their information." And they didn't realize that okay, that's anxiety with attachment, not anxiety without attachment. So, and that can be hard to tell parents because they feel bad because the child will say something like, "Well, what's going to happen next?" And you say, "Well, how will you find out?" And the child goes, "Oh, I guess by waiting, finding out next." And some people feel mean because it's like, "Well, why don't you just tell them?" And part of it is like we want them to get used to they don't have to know everything and they're going to be okay when they don't know everything. And they have to have that experience. Versus, and then there's the other side. It's not just like too much information and they're overwhelmed how they're going to handle it. Because these kids are already convinced that adults have hurt them and don't love them and aren't going to be there for them, then, life happens. Mom had heavy traffic on the way home and she said she was going to be home at 5. So the kid who doesn't trust her and that mom shows up at 5:30, you lied to me, right? It's you can't reason out to the child, well, there was traffic and blah, 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 this. So I have my parents say, I will be back, right? And we don't really tell them when. And some people think that's really harsh, but it's because we're trying to build, because we can guarantee, I mean, unless unfortunately the parent died, but that generally that doesn't happen, right? We can pretty much guarantee that that parent is going to be back, but we can't always guarantee the time, the circumstances, right? So they get that experience of like, oh, mom and dad mean what they say and say what they mean, and I can trust them. And it has to be action based, more like, oh, she did come back. It's not like, oh, she told me at 5:30, but then showed up at whatever time, right? So those would be some, I mean, those aren't so practical, but sometimes I feel like it's okay to just let them, they don't need to know everything. And it's okay to ask them to respond to kids with a question. When they ask you something, don't just be like, I'm going to lecture you and tell you stuff, especially with our kids with I mean, sometimes you have to gauge where the question's from. If you think the child knows the answer or has the capacity to come up with the answer, you can help the brain develop back from fight survival mode back here, back to its frontal lobe where your thinking and cognitive and affect and thought is by responding. Well, what do you think? Blah blah blah. Or they say, I don't know. And some of our kids do that because they just know how to play helpless, and they'll work really hard at you doing the work for them. And you're like, oh, it would just be easier to give the answer. But it's all about providing opportunities for them to. So those are a couple like basic, simple things. The program is very advanced, but those would be some of the felt safe, some ideas of how providing practically felt safety for a child that potentially lacks attachment.
I think that's fantastic because as you were speaking, I was like, some of those things can apply to adults or
Yes.
people, right? Any at any age, because if you're, let's say we take it away from children, we talk about adults, you want to feel safe, let's say in your marriage, in your relationship,
Hmm.
whether it's romantic, whether it's a friendship, whether it's family, whether it's at work, you want to feel safe because outside of ourselves, there's a lot of unsafe situations that we can either directly put ourselves in or indirectly put ourselves in. But
Hmm.
children, they're so reliant on their caregivers, whether they're biological or they're not, so they're yielding a lot of control when you think about it, right? And they're yielding a lot of trust. Like, I have to trust Sarah Jane or Terrain to ensure my safety and provided for because I can't do it for myself. Similar to, let's say, some people who are advanced in years and maybe
Yes.
they have vertigo or maybe they have a disability, right? There's now they have to rely on other people. So when you say felt safety, what came to my mind is they have to feel safe internally first
Hmm.
before externally. Would that be a good indicator of it?
Yes. Absolutely. Because you can tell the difference between someone who's sitting in a room who feels safe in that room and a person who's sitting in a room who doesn't feel safe, even if there's nothing going on. Like there's technically no danger.
So then is part of that felt safety, is it mind, body, and soul individually, or is it a combination?
I mean, I would say it was a combination of all those things. I think it looks different based on based on where the individual is at. Like and that's adults too. Like some of our kids, when they're that severe and can't feel anything, they have to have the embodied experience of, and because of where they're developmentally at chronologically, even if other parts of their brain are like, sometimes they have the skills of a 25-year-old because they have such high street smarts because that's how they survived. But so we give them the experience through like the structure, the way we do. We have the safety check protocol, which is how we intervene through behaviors to help the child in a brain-based way. And it can seem a little bit weird, but when that child starts to, and some of our stuff, like, I've had parents approach me, well, what if my child becomes a people pleaser? And I said, okay, well, it's possible that that could happen, which it depends on the kid's personality because we all have a different way we're going to kind of gauge. But I said, if the child ever actually gets to the point where they're a people pleaser, usually that means they have enough conscious development, even if it's overconscious, to actually to do well in something like therapy. They're not just going to lie themselves out of and they're not a threat to anybody. I mean, our severe kids who are like, we have to keep them safe so they're not taking anybody's lives or anything like that. That's really severe. But if we can get them to the point where they're even though a people pleasing isn't healthy, but it wakes them enough. We don't ever want to push them that far, but it gets them in a place where they are even considering a reciprocal relationship of some sort. And then they can handle like the therapy that actually helps with some of the deeper changing their narrative in their mind, like some of that actual therapeutic work that you do with a therapist in sessions where you're talking. But it's pretty hard to do that with a child who's just like off its rocker, constantly figuring out how to escape and burn the house down. And you're like, so if that makes any sense. Because I think it is all those things, right? Because I think the human person, because we're not just a body, but we're also not just our souls, right? We're both of those things working together. And then our psychological. So those first years of development is when the majority of your social and your psychological and your emotional like development is developing. So your whole worldview. So those could you can consider those three different parts of your body, right? But they all those in my mind, any sort of healing, you pretty much always have to encompass everything, right? You want it to be fully human, fully holistic, fully integrated, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and you made a great point where someone enters a room and let's say you take someone who's been abused. Let's say
Yes.
a woman who's been abused by a man, right? Because in her childhood, she was abused by her uncle or whomever. She enters a room and there's a man that resembles her uncle. She feels physically unsafe. But when she starts to think about it, this person didn't do anything to her. He just happened to be there and happened to be dressed similarly to her abuser, right? But she feels it in her soul. So to your point, she has to do some work to get safe physically, emotionally, mentally, and from a spiritual aspect as well. For the
Mm,
caregivers, how do we
yes.
help them to get emotionally safe themselves?
Usually the biggest thing that we do, depending on the severity of the child, is you start helping the parent feel better if you believe them. Um, and obviously, don't get me wrong, there's probably a few cases we've worked with where maybe that's not the case, but generally anybody who's willing to do the work to get to us um, is usually trying. Nobody who's usually an abusive parent isn't looking for help this way, right? Generally. So letting the parent know that you believe them. Because I have so many parents, or I was trying to train a respite provider for a family, and it was a family friend, and she's like, "Oh, but every kid does that." And I'm like, that's like the worst thing you could say to a mom who is like afraid at night if a child's going to come and attack her in the middle of the night. That's not normal. And when I say normal, I mean like healthy, right? It's just like no parent like that should I mean being a parent is hard even when you're working with pretty healthy attached kids and no one has a perfect attachment but you can have a relatively secure attachment to some extent and then we have this other end or it's I had an adoptive mom who someone told her that she did it the easy way because she adopted kids and didn't have kids but she struggled with infertility and I was like, and she grieved that. Like she so badly just wanted to be a mom and then she couldn't have kids. And I just thought I know that person's trying to be, I'm sure it came from a good place. But the biggest thing is like believe you, watch what you say, um, and support them, like get educated. One thing that Karen opened up recently is her new community support program. So she will actually meet with the people that the parents are like, okay, this is my community and try to work with them. And then when she works with the like them individually, she can be like, okay, she won't just give like a blanket statement of the program. This is how we help kids because it'll be like personalized to the family. So it's believing parents. Parents need a break. Uh, you hear a lot in the world about children being abused by adults, and that's true. It does happen. A lot of our kids who end up getting through the system or whatever have experienced that. I work with parents who've been abused by children. Um, and secondary trauma or PTSD built up in a parent is real. It's a real thing, right? I remember a mom coming to give her child the dish of snack and her hands just shaking, right? And this child was like 4. So um, it's yeah, it's belief, it's support, it's just getting educated and maybe not just looking it up on your phone, like try to take it from where the parent's coming from because we could look it up on our phone, but at the same time, what worked for one child may not have worked for this child. Right? Or that parents are doing a particular program, and it's not like our program's the only program that's going to work. No, that's not necessarily what I believe. Sometimes it's more about the consistency of everybody working together doing the same thing versus necessarily the particular program, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And it has me thinking where, yes, a lot of people are going to have their struggles, their trauma, but there's a way to continue to work through it to your point, right? I think probably one of the hardest steps is identifying it and saying that I want to be better.
Yes. Yes,
Hmm.
right. Something because they're just living in like survival mode, or they think it's because they can't even recognize it as trauma. That's a huge step, right? If we can help a caregiver even recognize that they're actually dealing with trauma themselves versus they're just failing as a parent. Because I'm like, this, I was like, because there's a lot of parent guilt and beat up, and to like, you're giving this compassion to your child. Can you look at your situation and just realize that, you were told if this child has a safe, loving home, they're going to be fine. But a safe, loving home for that child is is actually a threat to them, and it's not what they're used to. If they're used to chaos, they thrive in chaos, so they just bring chaos with them. So the parent has to recognize that and to get help. It is hard to convince our parents to be willing to it's okay to get respite. You're not being a bad parent by having your kid go away for a couple days. If that helps you be the better parent on the days you do have them, that's the best thing. And it's okay to go to your own therapy because it's amazing what this kind of suffering can make you really bitter and really hard. Or I think it opens you up to incredible opportunities for greater self-awareness. And because it's poking at things that maybe like if you just were never in it, they would never get poked at, right? So there's like this opportunity to dive really deep into who you are as a person. But it can be hard because the parents are there to help. And I mean, this is a cultural thing too. I think we struggle with this as certain generations, probably as Christians too, particularly. It's like we have to love, we have to be charitable, we have to serve. And we don't recognize that we should also be charitable to ourselves. And we can't give what we don't have. Um, and I think sometimes we have the savior complex. It's like, well, I could save the world if I do it the right way. Actually, no. As a person, I cannot save the world on my own, right? Like that's, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. Like you have people. One of the jokes I hear is once someone, it could be culture, it could be religion, it could be educational, it could be anything. Once you start your healing journey, there's some people out there is okay. I've been healed. Now I gotta go heal everyone else. Well, okay. Just remember now how long it took for you to start that path, right? And I think one of the most difficult things is, and this is where I feel sad, and maybe you've seen this, where someone will identify an area they need to work through. Let's say they're a caregiver, let's say there's something else, and they're loving what they're doing because their life just, it's sunshine and rainbows, as they say, right? Everything is so much clearer. Like this song, I can see clearly now the rain is gone.
Mm.
They start to help people, and then someone's like, I don't want your help.
Oh,
Right?
yes.
Then they're like, oh, wow. Like, what are your thoughts on that moment where someone is learning all these great things and they go to someone and the person's like, I don't want that.
Part of it is, we get excited and we want the whole world to join us. And part of it is like okay, this is hard. Part of it is we take it on as an identity, right? We take it on as like, oh, they rejected the help, so they rejected me. When you can't force people to receive help, and maybe that's not the help they need. And obviously you can over offer to people, but if we're just, I mean, if all you do is offer it to someone and then don't over offer, don't annoy them, but and they say no, we provided the opportunity, right? That's like you can't rip away people's freedom to do their thing.
100%. Yeah. And, if you bring religion into it, like, not everyone can be
Hmm.
saved.
Yeah, right. It's up to, yeah, because people make, for whatever reason, unknown to me, not everybody's going to open up to this to whatever the salvation is. Now, some people struggle with that because they like, well, that's terrible. But it's like if you flip it, if you what's the trade-off? We can't make choices and we're just robots. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it's worth the trade-off. Even if I can't really understand the mystery of all can't be saved to some extent, like I grapple with that, but then it's like I also want to believe that there's more to the human person than just being a mechanical robot, right?
This is great. You will take it, right? By any means necessary. And I think I see that affect a lot of people, whether they're coaches, therapists, counselors. Like, because I think that when people do the work that you do, that I do, and many others, we have such good intentions. And I think some people become, to your point, it's their identity.
Yes.
This modality is me. You say no to this, you're saying no to me. So then now, am I even worthy of this journey? The answer is yes. And I do see some people
Yes.
struggle with that, right?
Yes. Wow, that's a good point because when it becomes identity, it was so hard because it's at the same time, it's like part of your dignity is having the ability to participate in relationships and healing and those types of things, but it's not who you are. I was listening to Dr. Greg, he's a psychologist who runs the Catholic Psych Institute, and he was saying, so they have like 8 children or something, but him and his wife intentionally make it a priority that every couple months, each of them get a day totally by themselves just to be, because their identity is not found in I'm not I don't have value because I'm married, I don't have value because I'm a mother, I don't have value because I run the Catholic Psych Institute, I have value because I exist. And that's what makes me worth it, right? But it is so hard for us to actually stand on that foundation that I am worthy of this simply on my inherited right of my existence.
What role then do you think maybe shame and guilt plays in people wanting to um, help themselves as well as help their families or the children that they're working with?
Yeah. I think shame and guilt can play a lot of different things because at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff comes down to your intention and how free you feel as a human being and feel about yourself. You can still do good work even if you're taking it on as an identity, right? What you're doing could still have good fruit. But if you lose it at the end of the day, you're not going to know who you are anymore. Like you could have a nervous breakdown. You could like because and part of that is natural because at the same time I want to honor people's grief. Like it's also okay to grieve things, right? The lost things. I don't want to be like totally uh rise above our feelings or something to the point where like I don't want them to control you, but I just like I don't want to be numb either, right? So it's there's a lot of people that like so our parents will parent out of and this is I think this goes for any parent whether you're parenting kids with extreme trauma or not is like we're like I'm going to do better than my mom and dad or I feel really guilty because I didn't have this and I have to provide everything for my child and then things happen as a caregiver so I've also been a disability support worker things happen that I can't control and then I blame myself for it or I blame myself for the results of my client when I actually can't control how they respond to it. But can I hold on to the fact that it's still worth doing? That I can keep moving forward in it. It's not necessarily about the particular outcome, if that makes any sense.
You're absolutely right. We can't control the results that the people obtain that we're working with, right? One of the ways that I was able to handle that is that I found value in the fact that people wanted to work with me, regardless of the outcome. I was given the opportunity, so that was my gold medal, that was my gold star. So
Yes.
I didn't necessarily struggle with, come on, you gotta finish it, right? Because everyone's journey is different. Some people may take much longer than others, and so on. For yourself, where do you find your fuel, your energy, your drive to continue forward in the work that you're doing?
So my drive would be my faith, right? It is like I got severely attacked by a child and which happens to a lot of our parents. And I do think there's been a lot of redemption. God's given me a lot of redemption in that experience because I realize how some of our parents feel. Because what happened was the the problem with that, you get attacked by a kid, uh, the authorities get involved, and the adult is automatically blamed, right? So, and this is where I was blindsided. I just didn't get enough information. I wasn't even working directly with that kid. I was working with another child in the home. So I understand the feeling of that loss or something of like this is why this is like how do I handle it when it falls apart? I think at the end of the day, for me, is it I had this I have a really, really good friend who's like basically kind of atheist or maybe more agnostic would be a good example. And they're like, well, what if you die and you find out it's not real? And I said, I would rather die and find out it's not real and live my life believing that someone out there really loves me and created us with purpose, and dignity and free will because it kind of protects my sanity to part of it, and it gives me a sense of it's all gonna it's someone there is someone who knows me because I know at the end of the day. So I'm a big St. Pope John Paul II fan. He's quite the philosopher. He talks about phenomenology and personalism and stuff. So he'll use the word that there's a part of us that's incommunicable, which is saying there's a part of us that I actually can't communicate to you. No matter how much you get to know me, there's a part of me that's always going to remain a mystery. That's why there's also always more we can discover about each other. But so there's an inner loneliness that it's like no matter how much you're still looking at me through your unique person, right? Your own unique lens, just as I'm looking through you. I will never know you as deeply as I would love to. Um, but to believe that there's something sacred about that, that there's another being that created me that does know me to the depths of who I am, and I get to have full communion with that person or that being one day. Um, and right, and it was so when I look at other people and I don't understand them, I can go, I have reverence for the fact that they exist. It's this like, and sometimes it's hard for me to explain, like to my agnostic friend, trying to explain the like, all I can say is you're made in the image and likeness of God, therefore you're worth the opportunity. And I think a lot of people come at it from that angle, even if they're not using Christian language, right? There's still some value of like you have dignity, even if they're not saying it, well, it's because you were created by God. They could say it for whatever reason, the universe or all these different things, right? So you can come from that angle. But that's the language that I'm using, and that's kind of the foundation that I stand on. And it's when I have had moments where I thought I was going to lose everything. I see Jesus naked on the cross, lost everything, and I go, okay, you still love me even when that's me on the cross, and you know what it's like to suffer.
Yeah, that is so true. I grew up in a Christian household, and it created such a strong foundation for the person that I am. And then I branch out, and then I became this version of me, which is the version I love inside and out. And one thing I started to do, not started to do, one thing that I learned to do many years ago was to celebrate myself. Like I would celebrate others. So Sarah Jane, what are some of the ways that you celebrate yourself?
That's a good question. That's something I could probably practice more, right? Is celebrating. I know I've done an exercise where you like if you're feeling pain in your body, you'll like thank your heart for pumping or something like that, which is a small victory for me because it's like a small way of celebrating my existence. Because I grew up with as quite dyslexic. So really my narrative is that I'm not smart, right? And I mean, it's getting better. It's healing, but I'm always healing different layers of it, and it affects a lot of the decisions I make. So sometimes I have to celebrate the fact that I look at my life and I go, "Oh, can I celebrate the good things?" Um, that child I did the 3 years with, that was a good thing. without taking my identity in it, right? Like it's trying to find the balance of like celebrating myself and things where I have felt totally alive and also have are correcting the negative narrative of I'm not smart to the correct narrative. I actually am capable, I am intelligent, and I am competent. Now, do I know everything? Absolutely not. But it's like, oh, I've studied this thing and I've helped families and I've explained some stuff. And it's like, yeah, I actually can learn stuff. And if this disappears, I could probably move on to the next thing. So part of the practice of celebrating myself in really practical ways is I'm a huge journaler. So I will journal affirmations. Like I'm loved, I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I'm these things. And I think some people think that's really cheesy, but I think it is so necessary for me to uh just to recognize who I am, my own value, and then that can be passed on. And when it's passed on from I already have my own value, it's given without strings. I'm not giving it to you because I want you to validate me, right? I'm giving it to you freely because it's overflowing, if that makes any sense.
That's a really good point. Internal validation and justification and value, not external, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Let me ask you one final question, Sarah Jane, before I let you go. I want to give you three wishes for this question. You can wish
Okay.
for anything you want in the world except for more money because I don't have more money to give you. So, what are three things you wish people knew about the importance of valuing themselves and the children that they care for and why?
And three things?
Three things, or up to three
Three
things.
things.
I'm feeling generous today. Up to three things.
Up to three things. Okay, I was like, oh, three things. I had to think about three things. Okay, so all right, say the question again.
Yes. What are up to three things you wish people knew about valuing themselves and the children that they care for? Or you can do just themselves if you want.
Okay. All right. So I think I'm gonna reiterate the one thing. If people could just know that they're valuable simply because they exist. Um, and I'm gonna connect that with when we start, if we could know that as a caregiver and as a child, because a lot of our kids do get better. But at the end of the day, we can't fix a family. When I come in as a respiter, I'm not there to fix the family. I'm not there to fix the child. The only one that can fix the child is the child. The child has to be willing to open up to trust, which is extremely scary for these kids. And some kids are so hard they don't ever get there. Um, I mean, that is a very small percentage, but it is possible. So if I could tell them that that biggest thing is based on you're valuable because you exist and you are worth the opportunity. It's all about providing opportunities. Nothing is about manipulating it into being what we want it to be. So that would be one thing. And then when it comes to sharing that with yourself, being trauma informed when it comes to yourself, to reflect on now these are children with extreme attachment disorders. So they're quote unquote diagnosable, right? If you could know and give compassion to yourself to recognize that we can all relate to a child with an attachment disorder on some level. We all have some insecurity, lack of stability that we feel. We will say that, like, well, Karen will say that the internal working model that we get from attachment is our view of the world, our view of others, and our view of self. None of us have a perfect view of others, a perfect view of the world, and a perfect view of ourselves. So if we could also let that transform to recognizing we might generally believe that we're worth taking care of, but there's probably parts of us that don't believe it, right? We want to move towards believing that more and more fully and integrating that we can identify with these kids, even if we're not lack of conscious psychopathic type of child. But um, so those two things. So I'm valuable because I exist, worth opportunities. This one is I can relate to the attachment thing and I can grow more and more in a healthier worldview, view of others, and a view of myself as caregivers and the way that we see the child. And then for the third one, I want to see if I come up with something. I'm just like, huh, so what do I do with that? And then the third one, I think would be, I think there would be that embracing the thought that trauma is not your fault, but healing is your responsibility. Taking it like, so you're not playing the victim as it's poor me. I have no, to get your, what to, I mean, to, don't get me wrong. Some people are in a place where they don't have power. But if you're in a place where it's like, actually, I could get some of my power back. I'm not a powerless victim anymore. I can't undo everything that that person did to me, but I can get my autonomy back, right? And I can move